Today we have a super exciting guest on the show. Not only is he a good friend of ours, he is also an amazing photographer and videographer, Cal Engel from AV Collective. Cal, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Vince.
Yeah. We met Cal a few years ago through a mutual friend who connected us. And at the time when I met Cal, I was just getting into video, helped him out with some shoots. We traveled to Florida one time for a shoot with him. And since then, we've stayed connected and super grateful for the connection we had with him. But I'm going to pass it over to him. And I want to hear, Cal, maybe how you got started in photo and video.
Yeah, for sure. So it's kind of a weird background. So I literally kind of grew up in the agency world. So when I was in first grade, my dad started a company called Simon Marketing, who almost everybody knows as the Monopoly scandal company. And he was designing the Happy Meal toys for McDonald. So he was running the group. He had a bunch of people who worked with him, and he designed Happy Meal toys from first grade through 12th grade. So, you know, weekends he'd have work to do. We'd go into his office. We'd sit around. So I was kind of always surrounded by art. My mom was a seamstress and creating things as well. So it kind of is who I was growing up. So when I graduated from high school, I had a couple odd and end jobs, and then an opportunity opened up at that agency to go in and kind of work in their mount room. So creating comps for presentations, mocking up packaging, things like that. And so I did that for a little bit, and then the Monopoly thing blew up. Obviously, they fired that company, and then McDonald's did, and then kind of a couple more jobs, and I ended up running into a friend of mine who I had worked with at Simon. I was working at Hobby Lobby at the time doing framing, and then he was like, "Oh, we've got a position in the mount room here." And video had kind of always been, and photo, you know, what I was passionate about. So I was going to school in Michigan for a little bit to be a lawyer, of all things. But I was coming back to Chicago from Michigan every weekend, going to shows, concerts, shooting video for friends' bands and photos. And it kind of, you know, after a semester of college, I was like, this is stupid. Why am I driving back and forth? And then I ran into this guy, and I ended up going to work at the marketing store. And at the time, video was so new. Like, there were big production houses, but there wasn't a lot of like, internal people on staff doing kind of the internal stuff, the smaller client projects and things like that. So I was able to kind of grow my skills at the same time as building an internal team for them. And I was there, McDonald's was their main client, along with like Coke and a bunch of stuff like that. So we were working on cool brands and doing a lot of cool stuff. And, you know, it kind of just ran its course after 7 or 8 years where it wasn't growing fast enough for what I wanted to do. And then at the same time, on weekends and nights, I was doing a lot of music photography. Friends' bands is kind of how I got the start. And then, you know, I'd hit up publicists and stuff as they come through, and I'd work for bands coming through. And one of those bands was a band called Jack's Mannequin. And their tour manager at the time had become a friend of mine through a whole bunch of different people. But he was also one of the road managers for the Jonas Brothers. So when their photographer went on to do other stuff within, you know, Jonas Enterprises, they were like, "Oh, we need a new photographer." And he gave me a call and was like, you know, "Hey, are you interested in this? Let's get some interviews." I did the interviews, didn't hear anything forever. And then tour was starting on Friday, and I got a call on Wednesday. And I was like, at this point, I had written it off as, "Oh, this is never going to happen," you know, great pipe dream. And he was like, "Hey, tour starts in Chicago on Friday. Can you be there?" And I was like, "Oh, it's Wednesday. How is this even going to work?" So, and I was still at the marketing store at the time, but my boss was awesome. This guy, Steve Dennis. And I walked into his office. I still remember it. And I was like, "Hey, Steve, this is going to be real weird because you're not going to see this coming, but I'm leaving Friday to go travel the world." He was like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, "Well, you know," I explained the whole opportunity, and he was like, "Yeah, we can't pass that up. You know, we'll figure it out on our end." And he was real cool about everything. And, you know, Wednesday I got the call. Friday I was pulling up to the Tweeter Center or whatever it was at the time in Chicago. And I was on the road for about 8 months with them, you know, North America, South America. We did like a week in the Middle East and kind of traveling and photo, a little bit of video. They had a video guy out as well. And then when I got back from that, I kind of bounced around to a bunch of different things. I was on the brand side at a company called Optimum Nutrition. I was at an innovation agency. And then I ended up at a company called Aku, which is, you know, I won't go into the full spiel I normally give just because other people are going to see this. It was an interesting company. It was like MTV for mall food courts. And it was a startup, and it failed miserably. I mean, everybody had a good time while we were there, but you know, one day it was shut down, and at that point, I had to decide like, I have all this history, I have all these contacts, I have all these people I've dealt with in the past. Do I leverage that and try and do something on my own? Because of course, you know, all of us in the creative industry, we're always freelancing, even when we have regular jobs. And so I said, you know, whatever, let me try it. So I came up with the name AV Collective, and that was about 6 years ago now. And ever since then, I've just been, you know, networking and leveraging contacts I made in the marketing world. And a lot of those people that I worked with had gone on to other companies where they didn't have internal video teams, or they didn't have the budget to hire some of these huge agencies and production houses and things to handle that stuff for them. And that's kind of where I found my sweet spot of doing fun projects and stuff with solid budgets and things like that. But we're not the over-the-top place where you're going to show up with like 30 people on set and it's going to be crazy. Like, we like to keep it lean and, you know, working with you guys and get a good core of people that we love to interact with and work with, and then just building it from there. And here we are 6 years later, and it's crazy every time I think about how long it's been. I mean, I've been doing, I started at my first agency about, not to date myself, because I'm sure I'm older than everybody else, but about 20 years ago. So it's been 20 years of all sorts of different stuff, but making it happen.
I mean, you definitely are. I feel like when I originally met you, you were kind of like still in the agency phase. I know you and Durr were working at that. Was it the marketing store? Is that where you guys were, or is that?
That's where I work. That's where I worked with Mike Durr. Yeah, a good friend of mine. But I still remember when you called me. I was at Aku. Well, we were RMG Mall Media at that point. And I went into our studio and we talked for like an hour and a half or whatever. And I was like, this kid's got a lot of ambition. We just got to get him a little focused, see what happens. And
trying to do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and that was like 7 years ago now, probably, which is crazy.
It's just, yeah, it's cool to stay connected, and I love hearing, like, I mean, just you saying all that. I there's things I didn't even know that you did, and I feel like a lot of people in this industry, maybe they start off. I mean, it's cool that your parents were kind of involved in that. You were kind of like exposed to that art scene where some people maybe have to figure it out themselves. But it's nice that you were kind of surrounded by that. But then you took that ambition to kind of really make something of it, and you had a super, you know, you did the tour. You kind of got a taste of that traveling with the musician, but you also have that agency background. And I feel like a lot of people in the video world, like as we connect with more companies, a lot of people go from working for an agency, and then maybe they take what they learn and they're like, hey, you know, this just isn't me anymore. I want to do my own thing. And so can you maybe talk about that transition of having that agency background, how it's kind of maybe educated you on a lot of the business enough for you to kind of pivot and do your own thing?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, it definitely was helpful in knowing, you know, from my end now, kind of the inner workings of what an agency's like, who's involved, who's going to be doing what, who's going to be on your project, you know, all the red tape and stuff and politics you have to go through, because it can be defeating sometimes. You know, you send an estimate out to an agency, a bigger shop or whatever, and, you know, it might be 3 weeks later you haven't heard anything else, and it's just because on their end they're going through a million different things and trying to make it all happen and make it all work. So it's been great, you know, to know that side of it as I build my company. And, you know, really for me, a lot of what I learned at agencies came from specific people I worked with. So at the first place I was at, I worked with this guy, John Trabuzio, and he was this old Italian guy. I still remember I was so scared. Like, even though my dad was, you know, whatever, a senior management person there, he walked in, shirt's unbuttoned as far down as you can unbutton it, gold rings everywhere. He sits down at the table with his coffee and he looks at me and he's like, "You're Jimmy's kid? All right, don't fuck up." And that was it. Then he walked out of the room. I was like, what is this? Like, I had been there, but I didn't know what it was all about.
Right.
You might need to bleep that. I don't know if we're swearing on this thing.
We're good. But, it's clean.
But he taught me, you know, because he had been in the industry even longer than that. So he was doing, you know, what's called keylining before computers. He's cutting stuff out, pasting it together. And he taught me, you know, and you learn this in the agency world too, but that there's ups and downs to everything. So, like, as I was deciding if I was going to do my own thing or not, like, a lot of his words came back to me where, like, sometimes it's great. It's going to be a feast. You're going to be, you know, you can buy whatever you want. You can buy nice watches. You can do, you know, go out to nice dinners. But know that there's going to be a downturn. And when you hit that downturn, you're also, that's not it. Like, it's not going to stay. It's going to go back up. It's kind of cyclical in that way. And when I was starting AV Collective, you know, knowing that I had the contacts, knowing what he, you know, and that Steve Dennis guy I talked about had taught me, you know, it was a matter of, I knew that I had the background where, like Steve always told us, we don't ever say no. Like you just make it happen. Because a lot of what I did in the agency world was we were kind of the execution side. So internal clients would come to us and say, hey, this is what we need. And even if it was crazy, you don't say no, you just figure out how to make it happen. And knowing that and what Steve had taught me with that, I was like, all right, it can't be that hard to do it. I've been freelancing. It's definitely different to be on your own and looking at your own books and figuring out your own business and stuff like that. But, people, you become a close-knit family when you all work together in agency, because you're working, I worked 24 hours straight one time. Like, you're working with the same people. You're closely intertwined. You hang out together. I talked about Mike Durr. He was working with me at the marketing store. I still talk to him almost every day, because we spent so much time in the trenches together. I golf with a friend of mine I've known from that first company, 20 years now. And you kind of get the feeling that, you guys all know each other. You all want to see each other succeed. And when I decided to start AV Collective, I was like, all right, I'm going to leverage that and let's see how it plays out. Worst case, in a year, I have to find another job and figure it out from there. But, from the mental side of it, I knew, we're going to stick together. We're going to make it happen. And so far, fingers crossed, it's been good. We got through COVID. So,
there you go.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting is that, like, having that knowledge. I think a lot of people, like John and I, for example, out of college, I just went right into JV and just kind of spearheaded that. And I don't think there's any right or wrong way, but what we did lack was kind of that understanding how agencies work. And just like you said, when you are bidding a project and maybe you don't hear back, you kind of take it personal, like, oh, what did we do wrong? But you don't know that they're not just doing video; they're doing a branding package. They're this big picture where they're maybe taking a lot more than just that video. So maybe they're bidding for the video job, but they have all these other jobs they're working on. So I think the more and more we've evolved with JV, we kind of understand how these agencies start working and connect with people like you who kind of can shed some light on it and educate a little bit. You kind of start to realize it's kind of like a game of just kind of waiting and checking in on people and understanding that, like, you're not their number one priority all the time, and just be patient, and check in, follow up. But I want to talk. Yeah, sorry.
Let me jump in real quick. Sorry. The other thing to realize, as because I think this is aimed at video people, that, like, when you're working with a brand or a small company or something like that, like, you're talking to the person making the decision. Like, if JV needs some design work done or something, a designer's talking to you, you're the one making the decisions. And when you're dealing with the agency world, I mean, I just sent out, probably the biggest estimates we've ever sent out. And it's like, it's been 3 weeks, 2 weeks now. And it's like, all right, is this going to happen? Is it not? It's going to really impact kind of what happens for the year. But, I'm talking to an agency client who's then adding in, like you're saying, their design, their strategy, their end, whatever capabilities they're adding to the project. Then they have to present that to their client. Then their client's giving them feedback. They go back and forth a little bit. Then they touch base with you. Then, it's this whole world where, when you're dealing with smaller businesses or smaller companies, you're talking to the decision makers, basically. And when you're in the agency world, you're talking to the people who then have to talk to somebody else, who then have to talk to the decision maker. So that's where it gets, especially when you're first starting out, like, it can get really defeating to have, you think this great project's coming through, you're super excited, and then you don't hear anything forever. And it's like, oh, maybe I did something wrong. Maybe my estimate's too high. Maybe this, maybe that. And it's like, no, and those things might be the case, but, like, ultimately it's just so many people involved, and it's just kind of a different way of working that you just have to get used to as you go through it.
No, I totally agree. We're in the process right now where we're in that boat where we heard back and things are going good in our direction. And it is exactly that. They approved us as their video team, and now they're waiting to get final approval from the client. So it's really just, a waiting game, knowing, like, you did your part. But what I think is really interesting is, since I've known you, and, like, you travel a lot with your clients, and your clients have flown you to different countries, to different states, United States. I mean, one day you're in Colorado shooting, one day you're in Germany, one day you're in New York. I mean, can you talk about how those types of gigs started coming in, or maybe what you did to really start landing jobs outside your hometown?
Yeah, I think in this world, it's an interesting thing where, like, you almost become an approved vendor, and then, almost back to that feast or famine situation. So, like, when you get in at an agency, there's agencies I've worked with that I don't even know anybody there anymore. But when you're in with them, you get tons of work. They have tons of opportunities. You're the go-to. You're the main person, and then the person that's kind of spearheading and pushing you and advocating for you on their side leaves and goes somewhere else, and hopefully you get work wherever else they're going. But a lot of times, that's you get a big chunk and then they go somewhere else, or a big project happens or they go somewhere else. So like I was doing, recently, well, before COVID, I had a client whose client was Mercedes. And so they were doing these pop-up shops in malls all around the country. So I'd get a call, hey, we need, and this is a photo job, but like, hey, we need, we're opening in Connecticut this week. Next week, we're going to New York for this big opening, Seattle, LA, like kind of all over. And it was, it's just a matter of getting in and then having that person be the advocate for you and keeping them, happy and making sure you're doing work and, making sure you're doing, above and beyond work. So like with that stuff, they were used to waiting till the next day to get the photos, and I would go back to the hotel room that night and I would send them 10, edits. They're rough, obviously, you're doing them same day, but at the same time, within an hour of being done, 2 hours of being done, they're getting stuff in their inbox that they can then leverage and be like to their clients, look how, before we were doing this is an exceptional new way to do it. We have stuff to show you immediately. It's almost like they're there. And then that just kind of grows and rolls downhill, and you end up getting more work from them because you're delivering stuff that's making them look good to their client. And that's where it can get a little bit different too, agency versus small business, where like your job is to do the job right, but it's also to make your agency client look good to their clients. So the more stuff you can do to, kind of be exceptional or whatever, go outside the box and really step it up, the better off they look, and then the more they're going to want to send you stuff and really make it happen for you, and it benefits everybody.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think John and I, like, we just like kind of you, like if there's an opportunity to go out of the way, it's the little things, right? It's the devil's in the details, and like if you could, give them something to think about, like, oh, we never had it like that, and this guy's sending them right away. I mean, they're gonna want to go with you. It's like it's a new energy, it's a new way of doing things. But on the other side, so I feel like, Cal, you've got to this point where you're taking on, pretty big projects now, and I'm sure you've done the work with small businesses or just smaller types of projects, and then you have these bigger ones. But like when an inquiry comes in, is there a way that you kind of vet out a client or choose whether you even want to bid on it? Do you turn gigs down?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I started AV Collective to my main thing was coming from the agency world and internal, like in-house agency world. You got to do whatever the people are calling. Creative director calls and says, "Hey, this is what we're doing." You're doing it. You're on salary. So I started AV to kind of be able to pick and choose and do what I wanted to do. And I do that with some stuff. Generally, I find the stuff that I kind of would have passed on otherwise has a big enough budget and enough pieces of it that I can make it interesting, that right now, I would take it on. But it's that thing, the first conversation always tells you what you need to know. Like the one question I'm sure everybody always asks, what's the budget? So they'll say almost to a T, we have a number and but we're not really sharing it. Or like, we don't really know what does video cost. And my response to them is always, well, I bid everything at what it's going to be. Like if it's going to be a $10,000 project, I'm going to bid it at $10,000. If you tell me your budget's 20, I'm not going to suddenly come in at $19,999. I'm still going to come in at what I would have come in anyways. But what that's going to tell me is kind of your investment in the project and your expectation of production quality. So I always say, when they inevitably say, oh, we don't have any idea, I say that's totally cool. There's just a big difference between an expectation of $2,000 for this project, $10,000 for this project, or $50,000 for this project. And then they always say, between the two lowest ones. But if they're still like, well, I don't know, then you can generally tell that's a client, that project's not going to happen. You almost don't have to pick or choose. Like they're going to get the estimate and they're going to say, oh, well, we only had $1,500. And if they come back and say that, I say, that's great. I can probably find you somebody who could do the work for $1,500. It's going to be a younger person. It's going to be somebody who, is just getting started. That's just not what I'm doing. Like I'm not, I was talking to John yesterday, and, my thing is we all we work hard, we do great work, and we know our value. And if you can do those three things, and the last one, especially for running a business, is most important, I think, because I don't need to take on, super low budget stuff just to take on super low budget stuff. That stuff never ever turns into the big budget stuff. I think this guy Chase Jarvis said it one time, like, if you're a $500 vendor for a client, when they have a $5,000 project, they don't suddenly think that you're 10 times better than you were before. You're the $500 guy. They go to the $5,000 guy when they have that sort of budget. So there's no point in taking lower end stuff just to do it, unless, it's a real cool project. It's real, you can be real creative. Some of that depends on how much control they give you. But generally speaking, if it's not going to work out, there's no hard feelings from anybody. It just kind of is what it is. I know my worth. You guys know what you have to spend. And if it all comes together, it comes together. If it doesn't, then maybe it will next time. But they'll know if I turn down a $500 project and then that $5,000 one comes up, I'm going to be that $5,000 guy or whatever it might be. But, I think that's the thing, is just to know as you're starting out. I went through, when I first started, into this big cost of business calculator. I know exactly what I need to make per hour on a project. I don't bill by the hour, but to be profitable. And then within there's a little wiggle room and flexibility, but we all know our value. And if you stick to your value, you'll start getting to that point. And on that same budget front, like my wedding photographer is a guy that I had followed for a long time, before we hired him to shoot our wedding. And one day I noticed he had doubled his rates. And I was like, what? Like, he was already kind of high, and then he doubled his rates. And I was like, this is crazy. And I just sent him an email because, I was young at the time. I didn't know any better to ask people about rates. And I was like, hey, man, like, awesome for you, but I saw you double your rates. That's crazy. And he was like, yeah. He wrote me back, which was awesome. And he said, the way I think about it is I'm super busy at, let's say $2,000 a wedding. If I jump up to $4,000 a wedding, even if I lose half of my potential leads, I get half my time back. And that's always stuck with me. Like, okay, I could do $2,500, $2,000 projects or whatever, but there's a lot of time investment in that. Or I could take on one $10,000 project and have 2 months to do other stuff and talk to other clients and network and do all that stuff. And I think that's a really helpful mindset to think about as you're determining your worth. And then, when you end up in those situations where, especially, we all went through it with COVID, you don't want to turn anything down. So, but you need to know what you're worth and where you're going to fall in the hierarchy of all the billing and things like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, you hit it right there, because even with us growing, we do still get projects. I mean, like some of our first projects, we would do like a 2-day commercial shoot at a pizza spot. It was like $400. Like, we didn't know that worth, right? And we were just like hungry, taking it. And then obviously years have gone by where, we're in a position where, we do get a lot of inquiries where some of them we just say, hey, we're not interested, or like we don't have the bandwidth, because we know out the gate, like, is this something we want to really invest our time in? And a lot of it comes down to, we love to schedule a call with the client and just feel them out. Have you ever worked with a video production company? And if they say yes, we have, and kind of feel out what kind of project have you done. If they say no, it's like there's like little flags that could come up. And if you don't see that, and you take maybe this $5,000 project, but you're investing all this time in it, now you're kind of, you're working backwards, because now it's like, did you really want to take that project on? And I feel like over time, you kind of just, you learn how to lean on certain clients. And when things go right with like a client or an agency, you're like, we're going to put more of our time into that. And then something smaller is the same thing. Yeah, offering a recommendation. How can you maybe not say no directly and offer a solution still? So like, oh, they were courteous. Let me know when there's a bigger project that comes up. And that kind of comes every time. And I feel like clients are receptive to that, because they know, if they're not trying to spend a lot of money, hopefully they say that. But if not, they may get the hint, that it's maybe not a good fit. And if it's not a good fit, no heart, no feeling,
Yeah, and I always try, I try to help everybody out. Like I do a breadth of things at AV Collective, but like we don't do 3D work. So if a client calls me and says, hey, I need this, it happened with a past client the other day, like I need these 3D renderings done. Can you do that? I don't do it. I don't particularly want to be the one in charge of it and mark it up. So I say, no, I don't do it. Here are some guys I think or girls who would be great at it, and, talk to them. And then that client has a positive feeling about your company. Like, you're not just like, nope, don't do that, hang up the phone. Like, no, you're still solving things for them. You're still networking for them. You're still making it happen for them and solving their issues. And then the next time something comes up that is a good fit, you know, hopefully they give me a call. If they still go with that other place I referred them to, that's great. Like, you know, everybody needs to make money. Everybody needs to, you know, get new clients. It'll all come back around and
Right.
it'll all balance back out.
Yeah, and it's competitive, but I also say there's a lot of work, especially in the major cities. I mean, you're traveling every city, so you're pretty much your margin now is, it's not just Chicago, it's the world, right? So there's a lot of work, but like on the other side with running a business, I mean, John and I have luckily been able to lean on each other, where John kind of takes a lot of the business side of it, I take a lot more of the creative direction. How have you been able to really find balance and kind of balancing the creative with business running AV?
So that's an interesting question that I've been thinking about a lot about lately. You know, the way I structure AV Collective is and describe it to potential clients is, you know, we're small. Like, I'm the full-time employee and I have people I engage with regularly and a team that I can tap into. But we have the ability to grow to be however big or small you need us to be. So a good example is I have a client who does, like, they're a huge, gigantic company nobody's ever heard of, but literally companies couldn't function without them. But they were doing like an internal awards thing, and they wanted people filmed locally in all their different cities because it's a little more, you know, a little more of an honor for the winner. And it is a little cooler end product, obviously. So like when they called us and said, you know, I think we did in a week, I ran 12 shoots in 10 cities with like 40 people. And we have the ability to kind of scale up and down and you know, it all comes down to networking, you know, and it's even easier with Facebook groups and things like this. But I was able to source the right people to be in each city, get it all done, send me the files, and I did the editing, which was great. Being small, you know, the balance of business and creative is something I think more and more about, especially as I've been doing this longer and longer. And, you know, we've kind of, you know, we met a long time ago. We've kind of more reconnected lately again to work on some projects and collaborate. You know, that's been awesome. It's a lot about, for me, finding the right people that in the next year or two, I can start to say, you know, if I have something I know I need shot that I want to look awesome and I just want to show up on set, maybe I can call, you know, Vince or somebody to do that, or trying to find some editors and things that can kind of, I can still be the creative lead on it, but they can kind of do some of the more executional side. And I hate paperwork. I'm terrible with all that stuff. You know, I hate it all. So, you know, from the business end, it's finding the right tools, finding the right bookkeeping software so I can send an invoice and forget about it. And then once it gets paid, it's all, you know, they send the notifications, they do the follow-up, the software does it all for you. You know, getting a good accountant, you know, something nobody ever thinks about, but I know nothing about any of that stuff. So I just email him if I have any questions, even down to insurance. Like, I had an insurance company that I just didn't care for, but I didn't even think to go to a broker. So now I go to an insurance broker, and if I have a question, I fire him off an email and he handles everything. I bought a new camera and I had to get the insurance adjusted on it. And I just say, here's what I bought. He does all his stuff on the back end, sends me an email. All right, cool. You're taken care of. Good to go. So I think a lot of it when you're running a small place is finding the right tools that help you kind of get some of that business stuff off your plate. Like, in the end, it's always going to be there. And the more you do it, the less time it takes. You know, I can do an estimate in my head in like 2 minutes based on what a client says, and then I have to get it all down. But it's not like in the early days where I'd spend a half day toiling over every dollar and where it was allocated and how it was going to fit in and things like that. Like, you just end up getting a little better at it. But as I, you know, look towards the future, that's definitely something, you know, focusing more on being the creative director, you know, which is my title here, obviously, but, and less on the grinding it out execution side is something I'm starting to pivot towards. And, you know, hopefully it goes well. If it doesn't, you know, that's the joy of a small business. You can just pivot again in 6 months if it's not fitting the way you think it should.
Yeah. No, I feel like it's super similar. Like, and the more I talk to people that run these like production companies and they're just smaller based companies, you know, I think there is those positives of you know, not having to have people on full-time payroll where you're like thinking of things there's something to do. And so it's kind of like you have to grind it out and do those day to day. But when projects come, it's like similar how agencies have their preferred vendors, you in a sense have like preferred production companies within your bubble. So it's almost like you don't have to worry about the day to day and keeping people on. It's like, hey, when a project comes up, you find like a solid team. And with JV, I mean, we kind of got to a point where we have a well-renowned network of contractors. And I think the benefit of that is, you know, you can have them on a project for 3 days, and then after that, you know, you get them paid and they can move on and work with other people, and likewise. So I think there is that benefit of not really feeling like pigeonholed, like, oh, I have 15 employees and now, you know, I'm getting bogged down. And so much has changed with COVID. It's like everyone's worked for, I mean, we're doing a podcast from home. I would have never thought of even doing this. We used to have a studio and we used to have an office where all these people were there, and we're like, is this necessary? So it's kind of like reinventing the way, I guess, small businesses are, but it's like we could also scale. So I love that point of not really having the weight of carrying all these people every day, but also knowing you have that many people when you need them.
Yeah, well, and I think that model, I've said this for a long time, and I think it's finally coming to fruition with COVID and just general budgets and things, where even at agencies, you know, there's so much overhead at an agency that they're going to start thinking about now, like, all right, do we really need to keep all these people on staff, especially as, you know, younger people want to bounce around more anyways. You get the right people in charge and the right people with the right vision, and then you outsource that on the bottom end to the people to do the work and get it going, and they get to work on different things. You get to keep your costs lower, like in the same way, you know, if you need a brochure designed and a client comes to the agency and says, hey, we've only got $1,000 for this, typically an agency is going to have to say, no chance, can't even touch that. The overhead for one designer is $1,000 an hour or whatever it might be. But I think it's really shifting in that way to, okay, we'll get a lower person for that. Like we'll have, when you don't have everybody on staff, you're not as bogged down with, this is what we have to make it work within these confines, and you're open to whatever you want to take on, because you can find a junior person to do something, and then you can find the most senior person ever who's $10,000 an hour if the budget needs it and the project needs it, and you have the ability to kind of scale up and down as you need to do it. And I think that benefits everybody. It benefits your bottom line, benefits the people who are into the freelance world and want to work on different things they find interesting. And if they don't like a project, they can peace out after one video shoot or something. If they're just like, this doesn't really fit my style, I want to do something different, they're able to pivot. And, you know, it just helps everybody get a project done in the most efficient way and keeps everybody the happiest, I think. I mean, it's stressful, obviously. I'm sure you guys know too, like when you're the one in charge of bringing in the business, it gets stressful. You know, there's a lot more you think about, but at the same time, it's a lot more freeing to know, you know, I can coach my kids t-ball at 6 p.m. every Thursday because I make the rules. Like I just won't travel on Thursdays. And you say you won't travel on Thursdays, and then a project comes up and you find somebody to coach t-ball for you, but at least you can be there. You know, the other day I told my kids, like, oh, should I, you know, I might get a regular job and go to work 9 to 5 in the city just to feel out how they would feel about it. And they were like, what? Like, no, we want to play baseball after school. We want you to hang out. Like, we want you to be around, which is touching. Obviously they like me or whatever. But like at the same time, you do think about a lot of parents and things like that who have, like, they don't live in this creative world where we're all doing what we love to do, and they have to go to a 9 to 5 job. And that's just what it is.
Right. Yeah. It's a different reality, and super grateful that, you know, we've been able to make this work still. And I think that's the end goal. I think people that go down that route, they see this other way of doing it, and it's like, there are more times like, how are you doing it? But I think over time, you know, you find balance. And even with John having a baby, I mean, he's been able to balance it, and it's been working. And it's almost like, the balance has almost brought more business, because like when you work, you really are working. You're not like just lily-dallying all day. It's like, listen, I have time for my family, and I have time to work. And when I'm working, I'm working. And when I'm with my family, I'm not working, right?
Yeah.
But as we
and
kind
it gives you,
yeah.
Sorry, one more thing. It gives you different perspective too. Like, you know, he has a baby and he might see something a little bit differently than he would have otherwise. And because you guys have your own company, you're able to then say, hey, this is a really cool idea. Let's go down that path and see what happens. And maybe that then leads to a whole different sort of business for you guys, or for anybody, you know, doing their own thing and running their own place. You know, you have that flexibility to pivot. You're not locked in. McDonald's is our client. McDonald's is what we do. McDonald's, you know, the system well, I just banged the mic, but the system as it's called, it's got its own name. Like when you're in that world, that's what you do. And when you have your own thing and you're doing your own production company and you're doing, kind of what you love, you're able to pivot a little bit better to try different things out. And maybe it leads you down a whole different path you never would have even anticipated.
Yeah. No, I mean, you understand. We're in that same boat, it's you are in control, but it's also when it's time to get stuff done, it's time to get stuff done. And you have to maintain that personal balance. So, which is something I've been working on too. And I feel like being out here where I'm living now is giving me that balance of like, wow, there is life outside this computer that I've been editing on all day, right? Go get some fresh air. But as we kind of come to a close, I've been asking everyone, is there a piece of advice, for whether it's young video people or maybe people thinking about starting a video production company that you wish that you could tell yourself, 10 years ago from now, something that really sat with you?
I mean, I don't know that I'd go back and tell myself, but the things that like I was told as I was coming up, that cyclical arc, I think that has been, especially with COVID, last year wasn't great for anybody. Some people obviously it was, but most people it wasn't great for. And knowing like that's just that time and there's other times ahead. And even if that's just a mental, approach so that you put out some positivity and that ends up helping you kind of get through it, knowing it's going up and down. I think that is one of the more important pieces of advice I ever got as a young person. I was probably 18 when I started there, and learning that early made a lot of sense to me. And then, what my old boss, Steve Dennis, told me, you never say no. So like once you're engaged on something that, you're getting it done. Like I had a client last week who was like, we've had vendors in the past who say they'll do stuff and then they disappear and this and that. And what I like to tell everybody is, I treat myself as if when you call me, you're calling somebody, 3 offices over in your company. Like I'm here to get it done. Once I commit to it, there's no, like we figure out how to make it happen. And that I think has been a big part of, my mentality and kind of how I handle things and am able to get it going. And I guess the only thing I would maybe tell my younger self is, I took some chances, but like I was in agency world life for a while. Like maybe, if maybe branch out sooner, if you're doing something you're not really, like I was into what I was doing, but I knew I could be doing more. But solid paychecks, day job, things like that, make it easy. And you don't realize at that time, whatever the $400 a week I was making at Hobby Lobby or whatever it is, like I could go out on my own and easily make that with almost no skills, just, because you have the creative vision to do those sorts of projects. So if you feel like you have that, I say give it a go and see what happens early, because, when you're just starting out, it's a lot easier to then pivot back to a regular job if you need to. Because you don't own a house, you don't have kids, you don't have a wife, you don't have responsibilities. That's the word I was looking for. So take a chance would be what I would say, I guess.
I love that. Yeah, before you get sucked in the mud, dig yourself out before it's a little too late, or you're like 10 years have gone by and now I want to finally do this company. And I know people and I feel like they found success. There's success stories where people do come from agencies. So I think it's more of, if you don't like what you're doing, really reflect on it. And if you can't see yourself doing it, get out while you can, right?
Yeah, and you guys know that. You guys came out of college and went right into it. I'm sure your mindset was, if it doesn't work out, I can always pivot to something else.
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing for me was funny. Like my senior year of college, I had 2 internships lined up. So JV was like an idea, right? And then I had 2 internships lined up, and I was on these companies just like I was ready for an interview. I remember I was driving home for an interview, and I get this email like 2 days before. And the woman she was super nice to us, this corporate company in Chicago. I felt like, all right, this is it. I'm going to get the summer internship. And then she just says, hey, they don't even take me for the interview. She just off the bat just comes out and just says, hey, we decided to hire one of the CEO's friend's son. And I was like, okay. And then another company hired me. It was more of like a music internship, filming bands. I went in there. And I remember we did an interview, and I had this little mini camera I busted out and showed. I just was very, passionate in the interview, as I was told. And I left there like, there's no way. This felt so good. And I remember when getting saying, hey, we decided to go the other route with a different candidate. I asked obviously why. I felt like the interview was good. She's like, you were a little too ambitious in the interview. So then I kind of talked to myself and I was like, maybe this was a clear sign to just do my thing. And, almost 8 years later, I'm grateful that didn't happen, because that time opened up a window to really push JV, and now we're here. And so I think those stories are always good to reflect on and kind of appreciate.
I have this conversation semi-often with a buddy of mine, Keith, and it's like, I think, as much as we as creative people want to think it's 100% our skills and what we do and decisions we make and things like that got us to where we are, as I reflect back on my career, there's tons of things where I worked real hard, I put myself in a situation, and then luck happened. A job opening happened, the right client called. After I decided to start AV, I had a big project come in I wasn't anticipating. And it, because I was starting AV, I was able to take it on and things like that. But, a lot of it is the skill you do and put out there and the things you're doing. And a lot of it is just kind of, you happen to be in the right place at the right time. You meet the right person who can send you a project or get you started or whatever it might be. And, that's something I think you need to think about, because you don't want to get, like you go into that interview, you think it goes great, you're the perfect fit. You very easily could have come out of that when you didn't get the job and said, oh, I must be terrible at what I'm doing. This is not, and that's not it. It's luck. Like a certain extent, a certain portion of it is luck or whatever, karma, whatever you want to call it. You get yourself to the best place you can be in, and then you hope you meet the right person or the right things click. And if those don't click, something else does. You're able to say like, oh, that, I thought that was it. Obviously that didn't work out. It's lucky for you that didn't work out, because you could have very easily gone into that job and then 5 years later you're like, what am I even doing? I always wanted to do my own thing. And by happenstance, they gave that position to somebody else, and you're able to focus on JV and grow it to where it's at today.
Yeah. No, and those are the stories that kind of make me appreciate you almost thank those people, right? Even though I haven't talked to them, but yeah, no, Cal, this has been a super informative, man. I think I learned a lot about just kind of more about what you've done and your story. But before we sign off, I always like to ask, how can people reach you, whether they want to connect with AV or if they want to join your freelancer list? Do you mind sharing?
Yeah. So AV Collective, AVCollective.com is my website.
Helps if you know how to spell your own AV. Company name.
Yeah, AV. It's the AVJV podcast, as your brother said yesterday. That's the best place to drop me an email if you want to be an editor or want to just talk or whatever, get involved. And then Cal Engel, CALENGEL. I can't spell my last name either. At most social media, Instagram is where I post the most. I'm trying to get into more. That's where you can kind of see some travel stuff, some watch stuff, some random kid things, and yeah.
Always with the watch
action going. Always with the watch. I don't know. It's like a little piece of art you get to wear whenever you're doing something.